And joining us now, the anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News, Katie Couric, taking some time to talk about the passing of Walter Cronkite today. This is truly the end of an era, Katie.
It really is. You know, we had known, Chris and Dana, for some time that Walter's health was failing, and I think we knew this day would come. But now that it's here, I think everyone is so sad and upset to see this incredible icon no longer with us, but the legacy he leaves behind. I mean, that's sort of a hackneyed phrase, but it's so true. I mean, his body of work is so extraordinary, and the imprint he left not only on journalism but on the entire country, I think, is the likes we'll never see again.
His trustworthiness, his for generations now who don't understand news gathering in its infancy, he was there in the trenches. I mean, we believed what he said, we cried with him. His style really stands high above so many.
I know, and he also really set the standard, I think, for modern journalism, standards that are woefully unfulfilled at certain times in our current culture. But, you know, he was a reporter's reporter. He got his training at United Press. He knew how to write. He knew how to write well. He knew how to communicate. He knew how to get sources and to make sure his information was accurate. He had an incredible, I think, sensibility about the news, and he insisted he be called managing editor. He started that tradition because he wanted it clear that he had the final say on the content of the newscast, on what video or film, in his case, was used, and really, you know, how the stories would unfold. So, you know, he's left such a mark, and I think, you know, I get so inspired when I even read about him. I've known him and known a lot about him for many years, but just in recent days, rereading some of the wonderful things he did and has said, it's just really inspiring.
You talk about the legacy that he leaves behind. For you, when you were courted by CBS, to walk through these halls and to know what this man had done, and to now sit in the same studio and anchor the same broadcast that he revolutionized, what was that like for you?
It was very exciting and slightly intimidating. When I got this job, he called me. I had met him on a number of occasions and was, you know, starstruck at the time. And he invited me to go out to dinner with him. And he talked about covering the Nuremberg trials, talked about working for United Press. My dad also worked for United Press, so it was fun for us to talk about that. He talked about trying to be fair and objective and said he got a lot of grief from both sides of the aisle, which made him think he was doing something right. But it was a real treat and a real pleasure. And, you know, clearly there will never be anyone like Walter Cronkite, and I think, you know, I just felt privileged to be able to even attempt to be a quarter of the journalist and person he was when he occupied that chair.
Yeah. And he announces your name, too.
Yes, he does.
It must give you chills, Katie.
Yeah, that was so nice of him to do, to the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric, and of course we're going to have to retire that announce, but I feel very honored that he was able to do that for me. And I think, you know, to watch him, of course, the famous moment when he had to announce to the country that President Kennedy died, and he talked about it in the obituary that we did about him. It was so moving. He talked about that whole chapter in history, and at the end of the funeral, and when he talked about it, he started crying, and it was so, you cannot watch it without being so moved and almost crying yourself. But to have that moment when he covered the Kennedy assassination and did so with such integrity and decency and poignancy and humanity, and then to see him like a little kid covering the space program, he was just so gleeful.
He was giddy,
and people said he had adolescent enthusiasm for the space program, and to see those two sides of him, I think, really encapsulate who he was and what he was all about. And I think he had so much decency. And I think that's such a rare commodity, unfortunately, in this day and age. I mean, to be so decent. And I think that really came through the screen.
And to also think that the most trusted man in America was still the most trusted man in America 15 years after he left the anchor
Although
desk.
he has said, you know, it's funny, the most trusted man in America has become the most debated about man in America because, of course, he ruffled some feathers with some of his views and his outspokenness. But I think at certain points in his career, he felt he had a moral obligation to speak out and to not necessarily be fair and objective, but to say things the way he saw them.
He guided the nation through some of its darkest times. He probably earned that right, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Katie, thank you for taking the time.
Well,
We do
it's nice to
appreciate
see
it.
you both. It's a sad night, but it's also a wonderful opportunity to talk about, what a great man and an icon Walter Cronkite was.